All right, welcome back, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about React Router DOM hooks. So far, we've covered some hooks in React, such as useState and useEffect. And today we're going to be starting to dive into the React Router DOM and what hooks it has to offer in order for us to pass information. Now, the best way for us to learn this information is to actually see some practical application in it. There's a couple of examples that we have on our curriculum that are very straightforward, but it's probably going to be more fun if we actually go into building some sort of static website that we can all see. So with that said, we're going to essentially create a clone of the Rick and Morty API, but instead of doing it for Rick and Morty, we're going to do it for Game of Thrones. So let's go into this example here. Let's go into our README and make this our Game of Thrones game. And here inside of Game of Thrones, I want to have three separate pages. I want to have a home page, want to have an about page, which we don't necessarily need to worry about filling out. Then we want to have a characters page and a favorite characters page, which will go into how to handle favorite characters and the state of this list later on. All right, with that said, we will be interacting with the Game of Thrones API. I have shared the link inside of Yankee questions, so everybody should have it. So API reference, and let's just add the Game of Thrones API there. All right. So that's what we have for now. We'll utilize this API to render all characters, and we'll probably utilize it to get some individual character details as well. So let's add a different page here called a character page. All right. So now with this layout, utilizing the information that we've learned up to this point, how would we go about creating a router that connects to my Vite development server that will be able to render home, about, characters, a character, and favorite characters page?
Have to install React Router.
All right. So we have to install React Router. Let's go over our dev dependencies that we have here. So in our dependencies, we already have Axios installed. We have Bootstrap installed. We also have React Bootstrapped and the React Router DOM. So we have all of our dev dependencies that we'll be utilizing for this project already installed. Awesome start. What's next?
We'd make the individual pages for those.
All right, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to start a separate terminal just so that I have multiples here. And I'm going to make a directory named pages. Inside of this directory of pages, I will go ahead and make my actual pages requirement here. So we know that we have a home page. We have a about page. A characters page. We actually have a character page, which will be dedicated for details of one character. And then we have our favorite characters. So let's do favorite characters. All right, so let's take a look inside of the source directory. Here we see pages, and we have all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages in there. Fantastic. Thank you, Tristan. All right, what's the next step?
Make a router.jsx file.
Okay, so I'm gonna back one directory and make a router.jsx. All right, now I have the documents that I need to actually make this work. What's next?
And then you import pretty much all those pages onto the router.jsx.
All right, what exactly am I importing?
Import React from React. Yeah. Import app from JSX, or app from app.jsx.
Mm-hmm.
Import about page from pages or slash about page.jsx and do that for like a character, characters page, fave characters, and homepage.
Okay. Well, right now I'm getting this weird thing where it's saying, hey, about page. Where is about page coming from? Does about page exist?
About page does
Not until you
exist.
create it and export it.
Oh, yeah.
Got it. So I should go into the files and create them then. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's do about page. And this is going to return a fragment tag with an H2 saying about page. And let's just do a simple lorem ipsum here. Oh. All right, so there's our about page, and you said to export it, so I'm just gonna go ahead and assume that we want to make this the default export. All right. So now we've created our about page. All right, what about the rest of the pages?
You can basically just copy and paste that for all the other pages and then just change out the name of the pages and the default
All
and
right,
the function, the function name.
let's do that. So we change it to home. All right. Here we have characters. I'm just gonna put list characters here. And instead of about, I'm going to change that to characters. Oh, excuse me, these are favorite characters. All right, so then we have our favorite characters page showing up. And our favorite characters page is likely going to look the same as our characters page. All right, and then we have a character. And then here we're gonna put character, information, and image. All right, so we created all of our pages now. Now let's pick up from the router. So we have about page. We said we wanted to import the rest of the pages, so let's go into that. Now let's go into a character page. Great. Let's import characters page. And favorite characters. And finally, the home page. All right. So now we have all of our import statements there. Great. How do I go about building the router?
You would do like const router equals router or something like that, and then it would start out as a list. Oh, never mind. Yeah, you got the syntax. I think yeah, element or something like that might have been one of them.
Okay.
Index as well. I'm going off the dome. I don't. Oh, path. There we go.
So the path would be the slash because this is for our application, right? Okay, awesome. Now, how do we go about adding children?
That's what it is. Children. Okay. Um, for children, you can do I think path or index and then path, and then index will be true, and then the next one would be path. I think, or is that wrong?
So
Maybe
Wouldn't
wrong.
it just be element and then in like the greater than less than homepage
Yep, so we
and
have,
then just do the same for the rest?
so I would do index again.
No, for that one it would be path.
All right, awesome. So for the path, we'll put the about. Send back the about page. Then we'll go ahead and include the characters. Put in the characters page. And we'll worry about favorite characters and a character later on once we're done with this portion. Okay, great. So we've created a simple router. We don't have anything for error handling at this time, but that's okay. Now, what about this router? Because currently it's not connected and neither are the children. So let's take it one step at a time. How do I connect the children to app.jsx?
You'd do it in the app dot or main.jsx. Well, actually, yeah. I think it's main.jsx or app.jsx. And then no, it's main because you would do the outlet, I think.
Got it. So that's actually happening inside of app, and we would
Oh, apps. Gotcha.
put the outlet. All right. So right, if we take a look at our TL drawer here inside of app.jsx, we have the outlet, and that's what connects it to our children. All right, great. So now that we have all of this rendering, how do I make this application render by index.html? Because currently index.html doesn't know what it's going to render, right? It's just rendering a division, but then it utilizes a script to render something on the screen or to fill in this division utilizing JavaScript. So how do we do that?
What was the question again?
What is the last file that we have to change in order for the router to render our application when we run our server?
Main.jsx.
All right, so we go into main.jsx, and what do I change here?
Change the route provider or
We have to
between
import
React
the
and Streamlit.
router.
All right, so we're saying router, and then you said to import our own router. Interesting. When I try to do that, it doesn't seem to be able to recognize my router. Why is that happening? All right, if I try to import, let's say, let's go import router from router, and I try to run this. Oh, hello. I get an error. And it's telling me, hey, I have no idea what router is. Why is that?
Are you exporting router?
Let's take a look at router. So I come down to the bottom. It doesn't look like I am. So let's go ahead and export default the router. All right, let's Control C. Let's run our development server. And now we have our application rendering on the screen. All right, great. Let's open up for questions. Go ahead, Owen.
Yeah, can you scroll up on your router dot? Or no, you go back to your main.jsx. When you installed React Router DOM, did that all of the import statements and all in the React DOM.create root, did that populate automatically, or did you go in there and fix that up before we started? Because mine does not do that.
As I was typing it out, it was able to recognize it. If yours ain't doing it, you'll have to.
No, I'm talking the import statements above, like the router provider and the React DOM from React DOM /client, like line 2 and line 5. Did those automatically populate when you installed, or did you put those in there?
Line 2 should automatically be there. Line 5, it was able to recognize it as I was typing this out. And then when I pressed enter, it filled it out for me.
Okay.
Not doing it for you, then you'll need to type it out yourself.
For line 2, mine just, that doesn't show up for me. I have it installed though, React Router DOM. So Is that going to be obviously I can just put it in there and it works, but
when you run your development server, does everything work?
no, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay. Well,
But this is a problem I faced, and I didn't know if it was going to be. I just fix it automatically, and I was just curious as to how other people's stuff works.
yeah, everybody should be getting this statement automatically, specifically because we're using it down here. So we'll have to take a look at your system later on.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. All right. Any other questions? Okay, fantastic. So now that I have my router and it's showing up my application, how do I go about implementing some routing or some navigation so that the user that's utilizing my application can actually go in between pages?
A nav bar.
All right. So a nav
So
bar.
yeah, you can make a new folder in SRCs called components, and then name it navbar or something.
Right. So let's go ahead and make a navbar.jsx here. And let's code that navbar.jsx. What do we want in here?
You'll need the link thing. You'll need to import the link and the router information, like whatever router or not router, whatever navbar you choose from like Bootstrap or something.
Okay.
I think those import statements as well.
Let's go ahead and run that there. Let's go over to React Bootstrap and let's grab a navbar. Let's steal one real quick. There you are, navbar. All right, I'm making my life way too complicated. I'm just gonna steal the very one at the top. All right, so we grab the navbar, bring it over, paste it. We want to change this basic example with navbar. Okay, so there we go. We have the navbar that we selected from React Bootstrap. Now what?
You can get rid of the drop down stuff because we wouldn't use it.
Okay, so drop down goes away.
And then you could update those hrefs to links as well. Like with the two, it's like 2 equals.
Are we importing link yet?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Okay, what's next? So I changed to the to attribute.
And then you need the link in front, right?
Yeah, so we need to tell this to work.
Oh, as. Yeah, as. Gotcha.
Awesome. So now let's change this. This is gonna go to slash. That will take us home. And let's just change this to Game of Thrones. All right, we have a link here that will take us to about. And then finally one that will take us to characters. All right, here's all of my links. Everything has been built. I don't need this nav dropdown. It's being exported. Great, so I have my component built out. How do I plug it into my app?
You put it on the app.jsx file.
All right, so I go to app.jsx and I bring in my all right, let's see what our application does now. So there's my application. It has my Game of Thrones populating. Click on About, it goes to About page. I go to Characters and it shows me a list of characters. All right, fantastic. Does anyone have any questions over how we built that nav bar? Okay, great. Since no one has any questions over how we built that nav bar, let's move on to the functionality of our characters page. All right, so in our characters page, we want to do a couple of things. In here, I'm going to ensure that I'm able to make a request for a list of characters and display a bootstrap card for each individual character within the response. All right. How do I go about doing this?
First, we'd make a function to actually fetch the characters from the API.
I'm going to make this an asynchronous function. All right. Now what?
Then it would be let data
Okay.
in brackets equal. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was
await axios dot get.
that's it.
Perfect. So what is .get? All right. And where are we going to be sending this request to? Where would I go to find out that information?
The documentation page on the Game of Thrones API.
Perfect. So I go to the Game of Thrones API here by Swagger. It gives me an example of what the response will be, which is a pretty decent response, it looks like. And then it tells me the request URL. It also shows me the request URL if I were doing it through the terminal utilizing curl. And it also gives it to me here. All right, if I wanted to take this out for a spin, I could always utilize Thunder Client. And inside Thunder Client, I can just make my request here. Say, hey, I want to send a GET request, send it, and there it gives me my response coming back from this API. Okay, so now I know that the request URL works. I know what the request URL is. So now let's go ahead and implement it. We go over to the characters page, and we add that information for getting characters. All right, notice how it doesn't have something like pagination. It just gives us back all the characters that they have available. All right, so now we have the characters that come back from Game of Thrones. And I see a hand going up. Go ahead, Owen.
I'll ask it later, not the appropriate time to ask something.
All right, perfect. So we have our gate characters. We were able to receive our data. What are we going to do with this data, right? Our data is essentially an array of objects. Where do we want to store that array of objects so that it could trigger a re-render because it's going to check the virtual DOM against the DOM?
You'd want the uState defined like a uState above, I think,
Right, let's do characters.
and set characters.
We'll utilize a uState. All right, and since we know this is going to be saving an array, we could initialize it as an empty array. All right, so there it is. It's sending a request, checking on our characters. How do we actually set it? Or how would we go into changing the value of characters to this array of objects?
Would it
You
just
use
be?
Go
Would it
ahead.
just? Sorry, I'm like interrupting. Would it just be characters equals data dot character or?
So you're saying to do characters equals data? All right, so that would be one way of doing it. But if we take a look at this, we are assigning a constant variable, right? And characters is not something that could be reassigned.
Oh, would it be in the function itself?
Perfect. Yeah, we would utilize the function of set characters to data. All right, and by doing that, what we're doing is we're just simply saying, hey, instead of being an empty list, so it will start off as an empty list. Once we get back our data, we're going to send that data and store it in here. So every time characters is referenced, it will grab the current value that's inside here. All right. Awesome. So now we were able to store all of our information inside of a state variable. How do I go about listing each individual character as a list item for now, before we start implementing that bootstrap card?
Use a dot map or for loop.
All right, so let's do this. Let's have a UL, and let's go ahead and implement a characters dot map, where I'm going to utilize the variable of character for every individual character themselves. And I will be returning, what will I be returning here?
Does it matter? Or we could just do like first name and image or something?
Perfect. Yeah, let's just do the full name for now.
Okay.
How do I access the full name of each object? All right, so we see that full name is an attribute of the object. How do I actually access that?
I don't know if it'll work, but character dot full name.
Perfect. Yeah, we will utilize character dot full name. So remember, when we go through and we save this state, right? Here on set characters, we are saying that this state is now an array of objects. Wow, it is way harder to draw on this thing than I thought it would be. All right, now we have an array of objects. When we iterate through that array, we're saying that every object inside of said array will be referenced to as character. So when we go into character, we are looking at this entire object, and then we say dot full name, which is referencing to full name right up above. All right. So
Sorry,
now,
characters dot full name. I'm missing the S.
so characters is in reference to the entire array. Character without an S, it's just a variable that we're assigning for the object. All right. Let's go ahead and take a look at our project now and see where we're at. So we come over, we go to about page. Let's go into our characters page, and I believe we may have an error, which is okay. Let's go ahead and inspect here. Let's go into our console. Failed to reload. This could be due to syntax. Nope, it's running. We don't actually have an error, I don't think. Yeah, we don't have an error, but there is something that we're missing here. Notice how get characters is blank. That's because we never called it, right? We made the function, but we never actually called the function. So if I want this function to be triggered or happen every time this page renders on the screen, what kind of hook will ensure that that happens, that behavior is met?
Be a use effect.
Great. We'll go ahead and bring in a use effect. This use effect will just call the characters page, or excuse me, the get characters function. And because I want it to happen every time the component renders, I will just leave an empty dependency list because I don't need it to happen more than once. All right, let's go ahead and open it up for questions. Go ahead, Owen.
If you set the get characters function inside the use effect, would that trigger it the same way? Like if you just took that whole function in there and then.
Like if I put it inside of the use effect?
Yes.
Yes, it would still work the same.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
You would just have to call it at the end.
Yes, you would just have to actually call the function. So you could establish the function within the use effect, right? This is just saying, hey, I'm making this function inside of this body of the use effect. but you still
Okay.
have.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Let's hear it, James.
If you move get characters into the use effect like that, are you able to access it later the way it's written currently?
That's a great question. And that is because you're talking as far as scope, right? Because now it's within
Yes.
the scope of use effect. So if we were to call it out here, you'll see that it doesn't get recognized because it's no longer inside of the global scope. It is only within local scope of the use effect.
Okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next phase of our application here. Now I want to actually show cards for each one of these characters. So I'm going to come over to the to Bootstrap, take a look at my components, and I know they have cards available for me to use. I'm just going to steal this one here. All right, so here's the Bootstrap code for the card. How do I go about making a card component inside of my application that I could render for each one of these characters?
Make another component called cards or something like that, character cards or something.
All right, let's make it a character card here. So we go inside of character card. We
Yeah.
paste basic example, change this to character card.
And you can put that export default right in front of the function as well.
Yes, that's correct. So just in case someone hasn't seen that before, it would look like this. It does the same exact thing. All right, so now we have a card. That's great. We have a button that says go somewhere. We probably want to change some of this information. Let's get rid of the card text. Let's say all we want to do is show the character image and the character full name. How do we go about setting those attributes in here?
You put like set data use effect or use state or the data use state into the title card. Or not the title card, I'm sorry. So we're trying to put information, right? I'm trying to look at where the description of it is in this bootstrap.
Yeah. We want to pass some information into this. So let's take a look at it this way, right? Maybe instead of our li item component here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to utilize this character card. And now we should see a couple of examples of character cards. But instead of showing me just the card without any information, I want to see a specific character image and their full name within the card. So how would I pass that information down to this child? Now we're talking about components, right? And passing down information. Do we remember how to utilize or how we could pass information in between children and parent components?
Could use a prop.
So we can utilize a prop saying character is equal to character. I'm just going to use the same naming convention so that it's not confusing that we're just passing down the information. All right, so now I can go into my character card. And because I passed it down as a prop, I can unpack my props and grab the character. So now the character is available within the card. How do I go about rendering the image and rendering the full name?
It's where you go into the API and see what the image and names are called within the API for each one.
Okay, so it looks like the name will be full name. So we know that here we're going to utilize full name. And we can see that the image is just image URL. All right. So here we have image URL, and there we can see the full name. What do I plug these in?
The source for
Source
the
and
image.
card title.
Yeah.
All right, so in card title, you're saying to plug it in. Okay, so we know that we're going to write some JavaScript there. And same thing for source here. We're going to write some JavaScript in there as well. All right, what would go inside the card title?
Probably the full name.
Okay, would it just be full name?
Be character dot full name.
Yeah.
So character dot full name. All right, and what would go under source?
Character dot image URL.
Right, character dot image URL. All right, now if we take a look at our application, we have our nice picture showing up where it has Daenerys Targaryen and all of our Game of Thrones characters that we can eventually have some functionality to click and take us look at a more detailed page of said characters. All right, so just to clarify what's happening here, we're iterating through the array of objects. For each object within the array, we are rendering a character card, and we are passing down that object to the character card. We then grab said object and access it to grab the properties of image URL and character full name. All right, does anyone have any questions over how to implement this character card component and how we went about getting this information to render on the screen properly?
Yeah, I do on that whole prop thing. So could you just kind of go through that? Because like my thought process before was like doing some import statements or something, but I guess when you pass that prop, you're just taking advantage of React for using code.
Exactly. So here we have the parent component, right? And the parent component is holding an array of objects. I can't type today. There we go. All right, so the parent component is holding an array of objects, right? Now, because we're holding an array of objects, what we do is we say, hey, for each object within the array, render an image. And this is where those image cards start rendering. Right, so the data is still here, right? I'm still holding the function, but when I start iterating through this function, all I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, I want you to grab this object and place it in here. Now I want you to grab this next one and place it down here. It goes to the third one, places it down below, and finally it goes to the fourth one and places it down below, right? It's just iterating from left to right, and it's showing information from top to bottom. Now it's going to render the information, but it's not going to actually display it unless I pass it down as a prop. So a prop or props are essentially just an object, in which case the object that we created was character with the value of character, which is just each unique object that's being passed down. Let me see if I can do this. I wouldn't be able to, yes, I can. And while I continue drawing this, I'll go ahead and answer the next question as best as I can. I think it's Jacob. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to recall it, is the format for the card, you got that from the React Bootstrap site, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I was just making sure. Thank you.
And while you're drawing that, so you're saying right now that the parent would be was it done in the app.jsx? I don't remember where that functionality came from where you pass down a prop. Oh, characters page. Okay, so characters page, that would be considered the parent to character card?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah, because the character card is a child is being utilized within characters page.
got you. Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes more sense now.
Awesome. Yeah, and then
Thank
here
you.
the visualization of the object, right? So props is equal to characters or character, excuse me, where the value is character. And each character that we are calling is just the individual object that is being passed within to each child component.
The first character that you're setting equal is just on line 25, and then the second character in the object, you could have named it whatever you wanted.
Yes, I could have named it anything here. So I could have named it individual, or let's just say IND, right? But I just have to make sure that it matches here. And now that it matches, it would still show up all of our content.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes more sense. Thank you.
Of course. So this will look like this. All right. Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions regarding props, components, parent to child relationships? Okay, doesn't look like we have any questions. So now let's go into our next portion of information. I want to have a functionality where when I click on this button, it sends me to a single character page and it shows me all of the information regarding the character that I clicked on. So the first thing that we have to implement is some sort of navigation on this button, right? And we know we have a button, but we just needed to have an on-click function. This on-click function will navigate to a new card. So we already have a character that has been created. If we take a look at our files here, we know that we have a character page. I just need to actually implement it inside of my router. So I'm going to come over to my router, add a new object, make the path of a character. I'm going to end it with a slash. And for this element, I want to render a character page. Great. Doesn't seem like anything crazy going on just now. Now we're just going to go ahead and add the navigation for this on-click function, right? Well, if we want to do navigation, we've utilized the link tag so far to be able to navigate in between pages. But now I want to add it as a functionality. I don't just want to have it as, a general link. I actually want to have a function or a way to respond where it's not something that the user may be able to click on. It's something written in actual code. So how do I handle this navigation? Well, we can handle this navigation by utilizing a React Router DOM hook called navigate. We can import navigate from React Router DOM. We then need to make an instance of it. So I can say const nav is equal to navigate. And that will make my navigation function here. Cannot destructure property to ref for. I apologize. I think I'm using the wrong hook here. It's use navigate. There you go. So now we have use navigate that gets called, and it returns to me a function named navigate. Well, now to utilize this function, I can do an onClick that will navigate, and I can pass in the URL pattern where I want it to go to. So in this case, the URL pattern that I want it to go to is a characters. So I can bring it over to my character card and paste my URL that I want to go to. All right, so to utilize the navigation function, one, I need to utilize use navigate from React Router DOM. I then create an instance of use navigate and save it under a variable named navigate. This gives me the functionality to then click on a button and navigate to a specific web page or URL. So when I click here, we can see that it takes me to a character, and here we can see a character page. We have the same functionality for all of the different characters for now. All right, and I see a question coming up from Juan. Let's hear it.
Yeah, so I was actually with the Rick and Morty API, I was messing with this already yesterday. However, I couldn't figure out why you have to declare it with navigate instead of just using the use navigate function as it is, and then just passing it in there. Like, is there something specific to that, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the use navigate is it returns the function. And that's the reason why we can see here on line 6 that navigate is in yellow, right? And the function that it returns is what gives us the capability to maneuver in between different pages. But the use navigate hook does a couple of extra things. It analyzes the router that you're currently working with. It grabs all the routes that are currently available, and then it finally returns the function. So this initiates the router capabilities per se, and it returns the function that you can actually use and interact with into this variable of navigate. Did that answer your question, Tom?
Yes, so similar to use state with the setting function within the array, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Owen?
Can you scroll over on your character card.jsx so we can see all of line 13?
Oh, that didn't help. Like this? All right. See the thumbs up. Let me go ahead and copy this as well. And send it to on the Yankee Platoon.
Your mic is hot, Owen.
All right. Okay, everything has been sent over. We have all of our information here. We keep getting this warning telling us, hey, you have to give an ID, which, okay, fine. Let's just give this thing an ID so that it will stop complaining. So let's go to characters page. And in here, I'm going to go ahead and pass in a key. And that key will be character.id. I'm assuming that they have that available. Let me see that. Yes, they do have character.id. Great. All right. So now we have our ability to maneuver in between our different characters and click on go somewhere to actually visualize a web page where we'll get all of those character details. Well, now, how do I determine which character was selected, right? I need to know the user selection and where it's rendering. Oh, I apologize. Before I move forward, is that a question, Juan?
Yeah, sorry, my mic cut out. What did you say we needed the key for again?
Oh, I apologize. It was giving me a warning saying, hey, all iterated children, whenever you utilize map and you're rendering multiple components, it's going to ask you to always render a key. So you have to pass in a unique key for each one of those components. And later on, if you learn more about React, keys are useful as far as being able to interact and create some more dynamic interfaces per se, instead of utilizing use state. It's almost like a handy dandy shortcut. It's there for us for now. We're not going to explore its capabilities just yet, but just know that it does exist.
You're referring to the custom ones that you're talking about is when you do like character comma index, right? like we've seen before.
Yes.
That one. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. So now, how do I make sure that I'm capturing the information that the user actually clicked on and that it's showing up on the correct screen? Well, in that case, I need to be able to pass parameters through my URL, right? I need to be able to know, hey, Daenerys Targaryen was the one that was chosen. Well, how do I do that? Well, one, I need to look at the documentation and determine what is it that I need to grab one single character. So if I come back here, I go over to the documentation that they have here in Swagger. Here they have characters. So here's how to get all characters. And then here they have a character and ID. It returns a specific character. All right, I can take a look at their URL. It gives me a little bit of an example of what it looks like. I want to try it out. And give one, I execute, and it gives me an example of the URL parameter that was sent in order to grab all of the information pertaining to only one person. All right. So how do I get this ID to get passed into a single characters page? Because for a character, the function of getting one specific character seems pretty simple, right? We can make a const get character information. We make this into an asynchronous function. This asynchronous function has data. And we then say, hey, when we get data, this is going to be await axios.get. And we pass in our handy dandy URL here. Right, and that will give me all of the character information. I can then make a character. So in this case, I'm going to say selected and then set selected. Make this into a use state. But in this case, because there is no selected character just yet, I'm going to put it as null. Right? I don't want it to be initialized to something that doesn't exist yet. And when my response come back, I would set selected to my data attribute that comes back. But when I do something like that, every single time I send the request, it's always going to give me back the response for Samuel Tarley. Right? So I need to create a way for my user to be able to change this and make this a little bit interactive. So let's go ahead and do this number. I'm going to go ahead and write a ternary statement saying, hey, if there is a selected person, then I want you to return an H1 tag that shows me selected. Oh, this number. Selected dot full name. Otherwise, I don't want you to show me anything. And let's create our use effect here that will fetch our information. All right. Let's go into our application to see what's going on. So here we have our application. I'm going to refresh it just so that we can see it. I click on Daenerys. Well,
The URL is misspelled.
oh, HTTPS. That will do it. There you go. Now we get Samuel Tarley. Okay, we go back. We click on, let's say we click on Arya. Well, I'm still getting Samuel Tarley. All right. So we know that we need an ID here to be passed in order to make this more reactive, right? Well, how do I accomplish that? How do I make it so that when somebody clicks on this URL pattern or somebody goes over to this URL, I'm able to capture this ID? And I see a hand up. Go ahead, Jacob.
Could you just put like in curly brackets like the character.id or something, and then that would like something like that along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's exactly what we're going for here, right? So I'm gonna, oh, go ahead, Owen.
Would you have to use a prompt and then pass that prompt in your characters page on
Yeah,
that functionality?
yeah, it would be something very similar, almost like a prompt, but not necessarily exactly a prompt.
No, you pass a prompt in a character page.
Yeah.
That'd be the character's ID.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it. Okay. Well, let's take a look at our functionality here. So far, I'm sending this request, right? Or I'm navigating through my URL to now go through a character, but I can change it so that I can pass parameters through my URL pattern. So in this case, what I want is I want an ID to be passed in when somebody goes to this character path. And by adding this colon, I am telling React Router, hey, this is either going to be a string or an integer. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but know that this pattern here will be flexible until you meet the next slash. So now I can actually pass in the ID. I can go over to the character card, and inside of this navigate function, I can change it so that it turns into interpolated string, and I pass in my character ID. All right, so here I can go into ind.id. All right, so let's go back here. We have our characters. I click on go somewhere. I'm still getting simultaneously, but notice that now I have 0. That's the ID of Daenerys Targaryen. All right, if I click on Jon Snow, yes, it is giving me simultaneously, but I am capturing the ID of Jon Snow. So we're almost there. We have a pretty good portion of the fight fixed here. Well, now that I'm passing this information, oh, and I totally forgot that slash. That's pretty important. Now that I'm passing this information, how do I capture it inside of a character page? Well, here's where another React Router DOM hook comes in. Here we're going to utilize use params. And what use params does is it returns to us an object of all the parameters being passed in the URL. So I can say, hey, const ID, and I need to put it within curly brackets because it is an object. And then I can pass in use params. Well, now, instead of passing in the number 1, and actually let's do this so that we can see it. So now when I click on Daenerys Targaryen, we get 0. That's the correct information there. Now we got 1 for Samwell. Scroll all the way to the bottom. We get 21. All right, so everything's working correctly. I'm able to pass in my argument through the URL pattern. Here you can see that I'm doing it in character card. I am passing the ID as a URL pattern. It shows up as 0 up above inside of a character. So in my router, I named it ID. I'm saying, hey, this parameter will be referenced to as ID. So now in a character page, I can grab that parameter using object destructuring and calling the use params function. And that's what allows me to capture it down here. Well, now to make the full circle, since I have the ID, I can just easily say, hey, I want you to implement the ID here. Now we can see it shows me Daenerys Targaryen. All right, we can open this up a little bit and add a couple more components in there. Instead of just having an H1 element, I can also have an image where the source will be the selected dot, and I believe it was image URL. There you go. We can even add a couple of text blocks here. Maybe we want a UL with a couple of LI items. Let's see what we have to offer from our API here. So we're already seeing the first name. Well, we're already seeing the full name. Maybe we want something like title. We can get here our selected dot title. We can have another list item here where we're saying, hey, we want to know which family this individual belonged to. We can do selected dot family. And I think that's all the information that we'll be able to interact with. So now we can see it gives me, hey, the title is Mother of Dragons. It's House Targaryen. If I go back and I click on Arya Stark, it gives me Arya Stark. She didn't have a title, or the title is no one. She was a family Stark. Catelyn Stark, Lady of Winterfell, House of Stark. Great. So I'm getting all the information passed in. I'm getting it for each individual character. When I click on a button, my navigate function looks into my router, grabs this URL, and passes the proper ID. The ID is identified by the browser as 2. This then gets captured by my characters page, or excuse me, by my A character page, utilizing the use params function. We grab the ID, send our Axios requests utilizing the proper ID, and we set our selected character. Now, we initialize our character as null, so we can't just go straight into rendering images and information because it's null. It doesn't exist. Null doesn't have a property of full name. So we have to ensure that we put it within a ternary statement saying, hey, does selected hold a value? If it does, I want you to render the following information. And if it doesn't, I don't want you to render anything. Sometimes instead of anything, maybe it may be a good idea to put a spinner, right? So while we're waiting for this request to be completed, a spinner is showing up on my screen. Just a couple of ways to skin a cat here. All right, does anyone have any questions over use navigate and use params? Go ahead, James.
On line 7, I think, the use param. When you're setting it as ID, is it does ID need to match, like, sorry, I'm trying to explain, the URL from the previous character card, or wherever you set where did you set ID, I guess, after that semicolon in that URL? Does that have to match up exactly for it to? Am
Yes.
I making sense? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So here I'm naming it ID. And because I'm naming it ID, when I utilize use params, I have to call it by ID.
Okay.
Both of those together.
You could call it something else on line 27 in the router, but it'd have to be exactly the same then in line 7.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. All right, Juan.
Can you pass multiple items, not just ID, for example?
Yeah, you definitely can. If you wanted to have some sort of nested page, maybe you have something like, hey, ID, name, and then you pass in name, right? You could do that as well, and that would also function. You just have to be really careful with your slashes and your URL naming conventions. You don't want to give away too much information to the user, right? Let me see, I think, so for example, what can I show? I don't want to show Netflix. Let me go into Amazon. Yeah. So for example, Amazon here, it's passing in parameters, right? Like this baby university thing, that's the title of the book, right? And there's a couple of other things like ID. Here's the ID of said book. And you can see how they separate it. So the first thing that comes through is the title of the book. That DP, I'm pretty sure stands for, hey, here, it's like a breaker saying, hey, here comes the ID. And then they provide the identification number. Rather, this is not a just static application. It's not just on the front end. It's also being utilized through the server, right? But they're still passing it through parameters in the front end URL so that when it communicates to the server and it sends a request, like we did here, it's sending the request to grab the proper information for this one book. Did that answer your question, Juan?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions regarding use navigate and use params? One?
One more. So, is this more efficient than using something like use location? Because when I was doing research, I figured out you could use navigate. I can request from the API on the previous page, and then display all the characters' information on the next page after I passed all the data using use location. Was that less, I guess, memory friendly or whatever resources friendly as opposed to passing parameters instead?
So I think use location is definitely more powerful. I think use navigate is more like the little brother of use location, right? With that said, we are concentrating on these specific tools because they're the ones least likely to change over the different React frameworks that are coming in the future. And that's the reason why we want to make sure that everyone's proficient on these tools rather than going into the black box of all the hooks inside of React. Does that answer your question, Juan?
Yes, thank you.
All right, awesome. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and pause our. All right, welcome back, everyone. Before we left, we were able to talk about use params, and we were also able to talk about the navigate function to be able to navigate between web pages, which is great. Now I can actually see a couple of buttons that will show me the information of each individual character. But now there's one more functionality that I want to add. I actually want to be able to see favorite characters, and I want a user to be able to save some characters to their favorites list. So I'm going to add that functionality here. I'm going to go ahead and I already have my favorite characters page. I'm just going to go to router and add that path here and say, hey, I want the user, or I want there to be a page named favorites. And for this page, I want the element that is rendered, or for this URL pattern, to be favorite characters page. All right, nothing crazy. Let me go over to my nav bar and create the link for that as well. Close this file so everybody can see it. Should go over to favorites. And here we'll just put favorites. All right, so now I'm able to click on favorites and see a favorites character page. But now the idea comes in of, hey, well, how would we even identify which one of these are favorites, right? I could, on the character card, I could simply just add a button here. Button, I could make it a variant of warning. And for this button, I can say, hey, add to favorites. Right? And I can still go to characters, and now I would have the ability to click on a button to actually add some of these characters to my favorites, right? But that functionality doesn't exist yet, and my favorites isn't necessarily showing me anything. Okay, well, now it's time to think about React from a more of a structure pyramid than anything, right? So if we take a look at our TL draws of what we've drawn so far, I want to go back all the way to when we talked about the JavaScript DOM. I think that's in here. Nope. There you go. All the way to when we talked about the JavaScript DOM. So when we talked about the JavaScript DOM, we kind of saw all these different trees being, or these different branches from a tree being able to populate, to pass down information, or to just simply iterate through this entire object, right? Well, now that we're talking about React, where is my React? Here we go. Nope. Yeah, now that we're talking about React, we can see that the same concept is being applied here, where I'm passing information down, right? It's right here, where I'm passing information down from the app to specific children. That's kind of the same functionality that we saw today in this current image, where, oh, there you go, in this current image, where we passed each one of these objects down below. Well, now let's break out this tree. that we drew up here, right? We have our application. Oh, probably want this in black. So there's app.jsx, which we know renders our entire application. Inside of app.jsx, we do have an outlet. Then inside of this outlet, we have the children, otherwise known as pages. Right, in here, we have the capability to access all of the different pages that we've made, such as home, about, characters, and a character, and finally the favorite characters. All right, so all of these different pages now exist, and they're available for me to utilize or access by the outlet. All right, the outlet is what gives me access to all of these pages, otherwise known as children. And that might be a better way to describe them here, is children. I don't want to put pages in there. This way we know that in the router, they're being identified as children. Okay, so this is a different tree that we haven't necessarily seen before. We haven't interacted before. But this goes into, hey, how can I pass information down to each one of these pages? So in this example, what we're trying to do is we're trying to be able to select characters by clicking add to favorites, and we'll be able to see them in our favorites page. Well, let's take a look at our TL draw. What we're saying here is that I want to select characters, but I want to be able to see them inside of my characters page, right? I want to share that information between both of them. Okay, great. So if I want to share information between both of these, and I want them both to have the same level of information, where would I create this variable so that it is accessible by both of these children?
Would you utilize the params?
Okay, so params has to do with the navigation process, right? So even though that is a reliable approach, it's not necessarily what we want here. Let's go ahead and talk. Maybe we want to take a step back and talk about this portion here. So my outlet connects me to all of my children. So we know that this variable or this naming convention that we're going to be utilizing needs to come down through the outlet, right? So at some portion or at some point, my outlet needs to receive this variable. So if my outlet needs to receive this variable, where would I create said variable? Go ahead, Owen.
App.jsx.
Perfect. I would create it at the app level, right? Which is the parent level. So here's where I create it. It gets passed down through outlet, and it makes it accessible to both characters and character page. So let's do that. I'm gonna keep that drawing right here on the left-hand side. I'm going to come over to app.jsx, and I'm going to create my characters. So const, these are my characters. We'll just say favorites. And then we'll say set favorites. This is going to be a use state that will be set to an empty array. All right, and every time I add a favorite, I'm just going to append it into the array. So now I'm just going to make a use effect This use effect is going to console.log favorites. And it's going to do that every time the value of favorites changes. All right. So now I've created the variable and it lives at app.jsx. But now I need a way to pass it down through the outlet. Well, we've seen props before. So there must be something similar to props that I could do with outlet. And in this case, the similarity is something called use outlet context. All we need to do is give our outlet some actual context to pass down. So here we can specify, here is the context that we'll be utilizing. And we have to pass it down in double curly brackets, right? That's the syntax of passing this down. And all we're going to pass down is going to be favorites and set favorites. That's it. All right, so now I have my app, right? This is where I created the state variable. I now need to pass it down through the outlet so that it's accessible to the children. And I do that utilizing context. Great. So now it's accessible to the children. Well, how do I grab this value within the children? Here's what we do. I can come over to the characters page. And here in the characters page, because this is a page, right? It is not a component. It is a page that is accessible to my outlet, right? I can call whatever I need to call as long as it lives within the outlet. I can grab my set favorites function. We can say, hey, I want to grab set favorites. And I want to grab this from use outlet context. This will give me the function of set favorites. All right. So let's just make a quick little addendum here. Let's have a button. That's let's click me. And in here, all we're going to do is have an onClick function that will set favorites. Let's just say it's going to set the favorites to 1, just so that we can see an update. And I see there's a question. Let me quickly cover this so that we can see it. And then afterwards, I'll open it up for questions. All right, so we're inspecting. We come over to our characters page. We refresh. Okay, there's no messages or anything like that. Excuse me, there should be a message. So here's from app.jsx line 12. We see the empty array. And when I click on click me, we see that it changes to 1. So what's happening? Well, when I click on click me, set favorites changes the value of favorites from an empty array to 1. There has been a change in the state variable of favorites, which triggers our use effect, and it console.logs the current value of favorites, in this case being 1, onto the console. All right, let's open it up for questions for up to this point. Go ahead, Juan.
Sorry, just to be sure. So in app JSX, we needed to have it as context. It can't be anything else. We did context equals.
It needs to be passed down as context. That's correct. This one is not a random variable. It needs to be named context.
Perfect. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
You have to, for the context variable, you have to put it in double quotes or double curly braces.
Yes, double curly braces every time.
Can you go back to your characters page to see the?
So in characters page, we grab it utilizing use outlet context, which is imported from React Router DOM up above. And here we're just calling the name of the variable that we want. In this case being set favorites.
Okay, so in the app.jsx, it's that's considered the parent for the context or the outlet context.
That is correct.
And then in this case, character's page would then be the child.
So the outlet is the child of app, right? And all of our pages are the children of outlet.
Which would be considered the relationship then would be a parent to child relationship with outlet and children.
Yes.
Okay.
Tristan?
Just for clarification, whenever you're setting up this function for set favorites, you're essentially making it to where the children can call it down and be able to execute that function at that level, and then it returns it back up to where it's at in app.jsx.
Right. So the communication now happens in both directions.
Okay.
Oh, what color? There you go. Pink. That works. Juan?
All right, so just to be clear, this needs to be used more sparingly than it would. What did we just learn? The passing the ID through the URL, or is this something that can function a little bit better than that?
So this is more, we wouldn't be, how do I explain this one? The way that I would explain this is more for memory consistency, like ensuring that the same information is displayed across separate children, whereas the use navigation or the use params is, hey, this specific page needs this information in order to render the correct content. All right. So one of them is for rendering, the other is for consistency and information.
It's really hot. Okay, got it. I got it.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Awesome. So now we were able to pass it down. We could see that we can utilize this information within characters. Well, now we could actually pass it down as a child to our character card. We can say, hey, we want set favorites to be set favorites. We can get rid of that button click function because we don't actually need it. And inside of our character card, well, now we can grab that function of set favorites and utilize it within our warning, right? So we can say, hey, on click, I want to set favorites. And in this case, I'm just going to do this and call my current character that was passed down, which currently we have as IND. All right, so now let's look at our functionality here. I come over to Vite, restart our server. All right, everything's working well. Well, if I wanted to add Jon Snow to my favorite characters, well, now I have when I clicked on that button, I now have an array of objects where that object holds Jon Snow. All right, and if I come over here and I click on Sansa Stark, well, it gives me Sansa Stark, but notice that it replaced Jon Snow. Okay, before I go on into explaining on how to add multiple objects into this array, I want to make sure that we all fully understand how set favorites made it all the way to this button inside of the character card. So at this point, I'm going to open up for questions. Does anyone have any questions as to how we were able to get set characters, or excuse me, set favorites from app.jsx all the way down to the character? Let's hear it, Danny.
All right, so we worked basically from the top down to set favorites individual. Can you go backwards now?
Go backwards?
Yeah,
What-
backwards, like in explaining. So like set favorites is coming from here, and then set favorites is being called here. You see what I'm saying?
Okay,
Like work up instead of working down.
got it. So from the card all the way up to app.jsx rather than from app.jsx to the card. Okay,
Correct.
awesome. Absolutely. So here we have our set favorites, right? This is where we're going to be interacting with that array of objects, or what we want to be interacting with. We're finally calling it. Set favorites is a function that comes in from the props. If we go back to our character page, we are passing the prop into the character card here as set favorites. We could see it on line 31. So here's where we're passing it in as a prop. The page itself gets it from use outlet context in line 10. Now, at this point, we went from character card, and let me just use this red. We went from character card to favorite, excuse me, let me fix that one more time. We went from character card to characters. And by utilizing this use outlet context, we're essentially going up our tree, up to children, and going back to the outlet. So now we go to app.jsx. Here is the context that we're passing in. We can see set favorites is being passed in on line 18. Well, that comes straight from app.jsx, where we can see it on line 9 of set favorites.
Appreciate it.
Of course. Any other questions? All right. If there are no other questions, then let's move on into adding multiple characters into this state here. I'm actually going to need the original variable as well of favorites. So I'm going to go back to my character page, grab favorites, pass it down as a prop. Go into my character card, grab that prop yet again. And instead of just setting it to an array, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to the destructured value or the spread operator of favorites plus the current object that I have. All right. So now if I go into my V application, I restart my server. I can add Daenerys. You can see that Daenerys is then displayed. I can add Samuel Tarly. Now we can see that my array has grown into 2. It has both Daenerys and Samuel. And we can add Cersei. And if we open it up, we can see that we have Daenerys, Samuel, and Cersei all showing up there on from my console.log on app.jsx line 12. All right, so we're just simply passing down all of our state variables, and we pass it down utilizing context to the page, and then we pass them down as props to the child of character card. All right, does anyone have any questions over how this worked?
Not a question, but can I see the syntax again for the spread operator?
Absolutely. Here we go.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. If there aren't any other questions, then let's move on into accessing this from my favorite characters. So now in my favorite characters, what I'm going to do is I want there to be either a list of cards that will show me my characters, my favorite characters, I apologize, or nothing. I want it to show me, hey, you don't have any character selected yet. So let me open this up, write some pseudocode, and say, if no favorite characters, return age 3, stating no characters selected. If characters iterate through character array and render character card per object. All right, how do we do this? Let me bring back up our image here. Remember our characters and set character functions, or excuse me, my favorites and set favorites function live at the app level. All right, let's hear it on.
You'd first have to set up your set favorites hook with the use outlet context. So const curly brackets set favorites.
Right, so we want to grab our favorites, and I think we want both of them. So we're just going to go ahead and grab favorites and set favorites and grab those from use outlet context. All right, great. So now we have our favorites inside of my page. What's next? All right, let's hear from Brian. What would be next in this portion? Let's say we want to account for this if statement here.
So it would be, I guess, would you do if favorites equals null?
All right, so favorites is going to be an empty list. So I guess we could do something like this, right?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. In that case, what do we do?
Then you would just return an H3 tag.
All right.
And then you could put yeah, just like no character selected, or please add favorites.
Okay, so that's pretty close. We just want to turn this into a ternary statement instead. So let's just switch that up here. We want to say, hey, if favorites is equal to the following, then return this H3 tag. And for now, we'll just say otherwise, return null. We'll leave it like that for now. All right, well, I'm getting this condition will always evaluate to false since JavaScript compares objects by reference. Ah, got it. All right, so favorites, just something to point out, an empty list will always be falsy as well. So make sure that we could just do this, right? If it is an empty list, then return no character selected. All right, so let's go over to Vite. Let's refresh our browser so that we can reset our states. We can go over to favorites and it'll tell me, hey, there's no character selected. All right, awesome. So we took care of the first portion. Now let's take care of the second one. What happens if there are characters selected? What do we do here? Sean?
Let's see. So if there are characters selected?
Yes. So we're handling line 7 through 9.
Okay, then I think you want to probably map over your favorites
All right, so let's go favorites.map.
for the characters, yeah. And going by the was it the parameters you set? Like ID, name, and was that house or whatever it is they use?
Right. So that's going to be happening inside of the character card. So do you just want me to call the character card in here?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Okay. So now we grab the character card. All right. And our character card needs a couple of props. So the character card needs IND, set favorites, and favorites, it looks like. So how do I pass those properties down?
He like I'm sorry, I don't know.
All right, let's pass it off. Let's hear from Jesus.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, awesome. Let's try Jacob. You're speaking, but you're muted. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just looking up the reference code that I might have that will give me the answer. I'm not exactly sure. Let's see.
I think Haley's trying to hook it up. Let's pass it off to Haley.
Once you do key equals the curly brackets and then character ID
All right.
and then so on and so forth with the name and everything that you wanted to include. If that makes sense. Or for the favorites, once you do favorites equals curly brackets and then favorites.
All right, awesome. Yeah, that's definitely pretty close. So if we take a look at the character card here, which it doesn't seem like I have open, but let me go ahead and open it up. All right, so if we take a look at the character card, we can see that it does take in 3 separate props, right? IND, which is in reference to the character, set favorites, and favorites. So we could always just even copy and paste them. So we could come over and paste them here. And then just take off these commas. Nope, definitely need that one. So what we can do is set IND to the character that is being passed. And then we can change our favorites to set favorites. And then finally, go ahead and move this over here. And then finally set favorites to favorites. All right, so there's the 3 properties that we need to pass down. IND, which is a representation of the character. Set favorites, which is a representation of set favorites that comes from the use outlet context. And then favorites, which also comes from the use outlet context. All right, Juan.
It would make sense to group those with the context like you did before in app.jsx, I think it was. Favorites and set favorites.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in this case, we're not passing it down as a context, we're passing it down directly to a child, right? And because we're passing it down directly to card.jsx, it would fall in as a prop. All right. So let's see it in application now. Let's open up our console here. We have no characters currently selected. Come over to characters and I close my nav bar. Gonna add a couple. Oh, mouse is weird. All right, so there we have 6 favorites in my array of objects. Well, now, if I scroll back up to the top, go to my nav bar, and go to favorites. Ooh, I'm getting an error here. Interesting. So if favorites, no character selected. Wonder why this is happening. Let's do this number. Go ahead, Tristan.
I don't know if this is gonna sound a little weird. Is it because your ternary might be backwards? Because it's asking if there isn't any, then
Huh, I think you're definitely right. I have my ternary backwards. Good catch. Yeah, good catch. There you go. Oh, nope, that's just my regular characters. All right, let me refresh here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That should do the trick. And now let's go over to our favorites. And there it is. 1, 2, 3, and 4. There is all my favorite characters displaying on the screen. All right, so what's happening here? Well, I created my use state, which is an array of objects. I pass it down through the outlet and I make it accessible in characters. In characters, I manipulate it. So I'm consistently adding directly into this array. All right, so I added 4 separate ones. And let me go back to this. And now when I go to my favorite characters, well, the communication is both directional, right? It can go back up and it can also go back down. So now when I go look at favorite characters, I'm seeing all 4 of those characters being represented down below. All right, so I was able to pass that communication in both directions, up and down, utilizing use outlet context. All right, does anyone have any questions regarding use outlet context? Let's hear it, Owen.
Would it be considered all right to set up your character's use state in the outlet since it's being used by both characters and, or no, never mind. I answered my own question.
Very well. All right, any other questions? All right, it doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So just to do a quick recap over what we've covered today. Today, we did a quick review over router JSX and how to implement a React router utilizing the React router DOM create browser router with router provider. We then covered how to make pages and a couple of components. In my characters page, we went into how to make a request every time the component renders, where we're grabbing all of our characters. And then we covered how to see individual characters' information utilizing use navigate within our character card. Use navigate will pass a parameter, which is identified by the router by a colon. Then in my A character page, you can see that use params is being grabbed out of the URL parameter and being utilized to make another request for one individual character. That covered use navigate and use params. We took a short break, and after our short break, we covered how to utilize use outlet context. We determined that if we want something that's being used against multiple pages, perhaps maybe a user, we would create our variable at the parent level, which is app.jsx, pass it down through the outlet as context, which then makes it accessible to the children so that we could have a communication flow that goes both ways. That can communicate between the app and all of the children and vice versa. At this point, does anyone have any questions over anything that we covered today? All right, if no one has any questions, let me go ahead and pause our recording.